Beggar girl sees Millionaire and shouts, "Daddy, I found you." The emergency wing of St. Mary's Private Hospital had always been a place where life and death danced an eternal waltz, but on this stormy October night, the pristine corridors echoed with something different, the desperate cries of a 15-year-old girl. "Please, I need to see Mr. William Anderson." "He's my father." Sarah's voice cracked as two security guards firmly gripped her arms. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor as they dragged her toward the exit. "My grandmother is dying at Memorial General. She needs help." "That's enough," the taller guard growled. "Mr. Anderson is a respected patient here. We don't need street kids making up stories." Lightning flashed through the tall windows, illuminating Sarah's rain-soaked figure. Her dark hair clung to her pale face, and her threadbare jacket dripped onto the immaculate floor. The fever burning through her body made the world spin, but she couldn't give up. Not now. The watch she fumbled with trembling fingers at the silver pocket watch hanging from her neck. Look at the engraving. It's the Anderson family crest. Victoria Anderson, who had been watching the scene from the corridor, stepped forward with practiced elegance. Her designer heels clicked against the marble as she approached, her face a mask of practiced indifference. "Let me see that watch." The guards loosened their grip slightly as Victoria examined the antique timepiece. Her perfectly manicured fingers traced the familiar crest, her expression unchanging until Sarah spoke again. "Please, Mrs. Anderson." "I have proof," with shaking hands. Sarah pulled down the collar of her wet jacket, revealing a heart-shaped birthmark on her neck, the same mark as Mr. Anderson, the one that runs in your family. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment as she recognized the distinctive mark, the same one she'd seen on her husband's neck countless times. But before she could speak, Sarah's fever-weakened legs finally gave way. She collapsed onto the cold floor, the watch clattering beside her. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper, her vision darkening at the edges. "I just want to save my grandmother. She's all I've had for 15 years. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing Sarah saw was Victoria's face, now transformed by a dawning recognition and something else, guilt. The storm outside grew stronger, its fury matching the turmoil about to engulf both the Andersons' carefully ordered world and Sarah's desperate one. If this opening scene has captured your interest and stirred your emotions, we invite you to join us on this journey by subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue crafting powerful stories that touch hearts and remind us of the enduring strength of love and family bonds. Sarah Mitchell's life had been a string of contradictions from the moment Grace found her on that rainy night 15 years ago. At 15, she possessed a peculiar blend of innocence and old soul wisdom that made her stand out among her peers at Lincoln High School. Her dark hair, usually tied in a practical ponytail, framed a face that carried echoes of someone else's features, a mystery that had haunted both her and Grace since that fateful night. Living in the modest Pine Street apartment above Miller's Bakery, Sarah had learned early on that wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in moments. Her uniform might have been second-hand, and her shoes might have been mended more times than she could count, but her mind was rich with dreams and determination. Every morning she would wake before dawn to help Mrs. Miller with the early bread batches, earning not just a few dollars but also the precious gift of day-old pastries that made Grace's eyes light up with childlike delight. Despite the hardships, Sarah carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed beyond her years. Her teachers often remarked how she would spend lunch breaks in the library, devouring books about history and art, subjects that seemed to call to something deep within her soul. But it was her hands that told the true story of her character, slightly rough from helping Grace with her seamstress work, yet gentle enough to tend to the small window box garden where she grew herbs for Grace's tea. The heart-shaped birthmark on her neck, usually hidden beneath carefully arranged collars, was both her most distinguishing feature and her biggest mystery. Grace had always said it was a sign of something special, though she would get a strange, distant look in her eyes whenever Sarah asked about it. The silver pocket watch that had been found with her as a baby remained her most treasured possession, its weight against her chest a constant reminder of unanswered questions. In school, Sarah was neither popular nor an outcast. She existed in that in-between space where quiet students often dwelt. Her best friend, Emma Carter, was the only one who knew the full extent of her situation, the only one who understood why Sarah would sometimes stare at passing luxury cars with a mixture of longing and confusion she couldn't quite explain. Emma would often share her lunch when Sarah's own was too meager, never making a show of it, understanding that friendship meant supporting without undermining dignity. But it was in moments of crisis that Sarah's true character shone brightest. When Tommy Peters, the classroom troublemaker, had his father arrested and couldn't afford lunch, it was Sarah who quietly shared her bakery leftovers, remembering how it felt to go hungry. When the school needed volunteers for the elderly home visits program, Sarah was always first to sign up, spending extra hours reading to seniors who reminded her of Grace. The relationship between Sarah and Grace defied traditional grandmother-granddaughter dynamics. They were more like two souls who had found each other in the vast ocean of life, clinging to each other with a love that transcended blood ties. Every evening they would sit at their small kitchen table, sharing simple meals and complex dreams, Grace's weathered hands often reaching across to squeeze Sarah's younger ones in moments of unspoken understanding. Yet beneath Sarah's composed exterior lay questions that burned brighter with each passing year. Who were her parents? Why was she left with nothing but a silver watch and a distinctive birthmark? These questions whispered in the quiet moments between classes, in the late hours when sleep eluded her, in the reflections she caught in store windows of herself walking beside Grace, their physical differences a stark reminder of the mystery of her origins. But more than answers, Sarah yearned to make Grace proud, to somehow repay the unconditional love that had saved her life that stormy night. She maintained straight as despite working part-time, helped with the sewing whenever her homework was done, and never complained about their circumstances. Her dream was to become a doctor, to help others the way Grace had helped her, though she kept this dream quiet, knowing their financial reality made it seem impossible. Life in the small apartment above Miller's bakery followed a rhythm as regular as the ticking of Sarah's silver pocket watch. Every morning Grace would wake at 5, her arthritis-riddled hands protesting as she prepared for another day at her sewing machine. Despite the pain that creased her weathered face, she never started the day without placing a gentle kiss on Sarah's forehead, a ritual unchanged since the night she found the abandoned baby on her doorstep. Their home, though modest, held a warmth that no amount of money could buy. The walls, painted in fading yellow, were adorned with Sarah's school certificates and artwork from her younger years. Grace had saved every single one, proudly displaying them as if they were priceless masterpieces. The furniture, though worn and mismatched, each told a story: the patched armchair where Grace would sit to mend clothing, the wobbly kitchen table where they shared their simple meals, the old sewing machine that had put food on their table for 15 years. Financial struggles were a constant shadow in their lives. Each month was a careful dance of priorities: rent, utilities, food, and Grace's medications. Sarah had learned early on to read the worry lines on Grace's face when bills arrived, to understand the significance of those quiet moments when her grandmother would sit at the kitchen table late at night, calculator in hand, trying to stretch dollars beyond their natural limits. Yet somehow Grace always managed to make their poverty feel temporary, like a challenge they would eventually overcome together. When Sarah's shoes wore thin, Grace would work extra hours, her fingers bleeding from countless needle pricks. When winter came, she would transform old blankets into warm coats that looked almost store-bought, adding little decorative touches that made Sarah feel special rather than poor. Their meals were simple but served with dignity. Grace had mastered the art of turning basic ingredients into meals that filled both stomach and soul. Bean soup became a French countryside specialty. Day-old bread was transformed into Italian crostini. And when things were particularly tight, Grace would tell stories of her own childhood during dinner, making Sarah forget they were eating plain rice for the third time that week. The hardest times were when Sarah needed something for school, new books, supplies, or fees for activities. Grace would never let her miss out, even if it meant pawning her own precious items. The gold locket containing her late husband's picture had been traded away when Sarah needed a scientific calculator for math class. Though Grace had tried to hide her tears that day, Sarah had seen them, and the memory fueled her determination to someday make things right. Their evening routine was sacred homework at the kitchen table while Grace sewed, sharing stories about their day. Grace would help Sarah with English essays while Sarah would read the small print instructions on Grace's medication bottles. They would often end their days watching old movies on their second-hand TV, Grace teaching Sarah to dance in their tiny living room, laughing together as they dodged the furniture. And the neighbors in their building became an extended family of sorts. Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3 billion would bring extra tamales when she cooked, insisting it was too much for her family anyway. Mr. Chen from the corner store would accidentally add extra fruits to their bags, turning a deaf ear to Grace's protests. The community looked out for each other, sharing what little they had, making life's burdens a bit lighter through collective kindness. But there were dark moments, 2 nights when Grace's cough seemed worse than usual, days when the electricity would be cut off until they could scrape together enough for the bill. Sarah learned to study by candlelight, to hand-wash clothes in the bathtub when the washing machine broke down, to ignore the whispers and stares at school when her uniform became visibly worn. Through it all, Grace maintained her dignity and taught Sarah to do the same. "We might be poor in pocket," she would say, smoothing Sarah's hair with tender hands, "but we're rich in what matters most." That love sustained them through the coldest winters, the emptiest cupboards, the most difficult days. It was a love that turned their tiny apartment into a palace, their simple meals into feasts, their modest lives into something beautiful and meaningful. The silver pocket watch around Sarah's neck might have been their only item of material value, but their lives were wealthy with moments of shared joy, mutual support, and unwavering love. The silver pocket watch that hung around Sarah's neck was more than just an heirloom, it was a constant reminder of her unknown origins. Its polished surface, though scratched by time, still caught the light in ways that seemed to whisper of a grander past. The Anderson family crest, intricately engraved on its cover, had become both familiar and foreign to her over the years, like a word repeated so many times it loses meaning. Grace rarely spoke about the night she found Sarah, but certain details had emerged over the years like pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. It had been raining, that much was certain, and the baby had been wrapped in what appeared to be expensive blankets, though soaked through. The watch had been secured around the infant's neck with a blue ribbon, and pinned to the blankets was a simple note that Grace had kept all these years. "Her name is Sarah. Please keep her safe." The heart-shaped birthmark on Sarah's neck was another piece of the mystery. Grace had noticed it immediately that first night, its distinct shape standing out against the baby's fair skin. Over the years, she'd caught Grace studying it with an expression that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Sometimes late at night, Sarah would catch her grandmother staring at old newspapers, though she would quickly fold them away when noticed. The watch itself held its own secrets. Inside the cover was an inscription so worn it was barely legible: "To my beloved son, may time bring you back to us." The craftsmanship spoke of wealth and history. Even the local jeweler had remarked on its quality when Sarah had taken it in for cleaning, suggesting it was worth more than their entire apartment's contents combined. But its true value lay in the connection it represented to her unknown past. Sarah had developed habits around the watch over the years. She would polish it every Sunday evening, carefully tracing the engraved crest with a soft cloth. The routine had become almost meditative, a moment when she would allow herself to wonder about her biological family. Were they looking for her? Did they miss her? Or had she been deliberately abandoned, left with only this expensive token as compensation? The heart-shaped birthmark had its own set of mysteries. As Sarah grew older, she began to notice how people would sometimes stare at it with recognition, though they would quickly look away when caught. Once, an elderly man at the grocery store had dropped his shopping basket upon glimpsing it, his face turning pale as if he'd seen a ghost. Before Sarah could question him, he had hurried away, leaving his groceries scattered on the floor. Grace's reactions to questions about either the watch or birthmark followed a pattern: initial hesitation, careful deflection, and finally a change of subject accompanied by that distant look in her eyes. It was as if she carried a burden of knowledge she wasn't ready to share, or perhaps couldn't share. Some mysteries reveal themselves in their own time, she would say, smoothing Sarah's hair in that gentle way of hers. The watch had become Sarah's most precious possession, not for its monetary value but for the possibilities it represented. She would often find herself opening and closing it, listening to its steady tick, wondering if somewhere out there, someone else was missing this family heirloom, and perhaps missing her too. The crest had led her to research the Anderson family, though information about them was surprisingly scarce in public records. Local gossip painted the Andersons as old money, their influence in the city spanning generations. Their mansion on the hill was visible from certain parts of town, its gates always closed, its windows reflecting the sun like distant stars. Sarah would sometimes take detours past it on her way home from school, studying its imposing facade and manicured gardens, feeling an inexplicable pull she couldn't explain. The combination of the watch and birthmark had created a mythology of sorts among their neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez was convinced Sarah was a lost princess, while Mr. Chen would make cryptic comments about fate and destiny whenever he saw the watch glinting at her neck. Even Emma, practical as she was, couldn't help speculating about Sarah's true identity. But for all the questions these items raised, they also anchored Sarah to her present reality. The watch's steady ticking had become the soundtrack to her life with Grace, its weight against her chest a reminder that sometimes the family you find is more precious than the family you're born into. Still, on quiet nights when Grace's breathing had settled into sleep, Sarah would hold the watch up to the moonlight, tracing the crest with her finger, and wonder if somewhere in the vast city someone was thinking of her too. The morning Grace collapse started like any other. Sarah was helping Mrs. Miller with the early bread batches downstairs, the familiar scent of fresh pastries filling the air. The first indication that something was wrong was the absence of Grace's usual footsteps above the gentle creaking of floorboards that typically signaled her grandmother preparing for another day at the sewing machine. Grandma Sarah called out as she climbed the stairs, flour still dusting her apron. The silence that greeted her made her heart skip a beat. She found Grace crumpled beside her beloved sewing machine, her face ashen, one hand clutching her chest while the other still held a half-finished dress. The needle had torn through the fabric, leaving a jagged line like a scar across the delicate material. Sarah Grace's voice was barely a whisper, her normally bright eyes clouded with pain. "Can't." Breathe the words came out in gasps, each one seeming to cost her tremendous effort. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed 911, her voice cracking as she reported their address. The 5 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive felt like an eternity. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, their voices calm but urgent as they assessed Grace's condition. Blood pressures dangerously high, one reported, while another attached monitors that filled the small apartment with ominous beeping. Sarah watched helplessly as they lifted Grace onto the stretcher, her grandmother's small frame looking impossibly fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. The ride to Memorial General Hospital was a blur of sirens and fear. Sarah held Grace's hand, noticing how cold it felt despite the warm morning. The paramedics worked continuously, speaking in medical terms that Sarah couldn't fully understand but knew weren't good. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness, each time looking for Sarah with increasingly unfocused eyes. Emergency room doctors swarmed around Grace the moment they arrived, their white coats forming a barrier between Sarah and her grandmother. Severe cardiac event, someone called out. Need immediate intervention. Sarah stood frozen, watching as they wheeled Grace away through double doors marked authorized personnel only. Hours passed in the waiting room, each tick of the wall clock echoing like thunder in Sarah's ears. She sat rigid in the uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing her flour-dusted clothes from the bakery. Other families came and went, receiving news both good and bad, while Sarah waited, clutching her silver pocket watch like a lifeline. When the doctor finally appeared, his grave expression made Sarah's blood run cold. "Your grandmother's condition is critical," he explained, his voice gentle but direct. "She suffered a severe heart attack, complicated by underlying conditions we weren't aware of. Her heart is very weak, and there's significant damage to her cardiac muscles." The words that followed hit Sarah like physical blows: specialized treatment, advanced facilities, experimental procedures. But it was the numbers that made her world truly crumble, astronomical figures that represented the cost of keeping Grace alive. The public hospital could provide basic care, but Grace's condition required more than they could offer. Without specialized intervention, the doctor continued, his words careful but devastating, "We're looking at a very poor prognosis. There's a new treatment available at St. Mary's private hospital that could help, but..." He trailed off, looking at Sarah's worn clothes and flour-stained apron, the unspoken reality of their financial situation hanging heavy in the air. Sarah was allowed to see Grace briefly before they moved her to the cardiac care unit. Her grandmother lay connected to various machines, their steady beeping a mechanical lullaby. An oxygen mask covered most of her face, but her eyes found Sarah's immediately. With tremendous effort, Grace lifted her hand slightly off the bed. "My brave girl," she whispered through the mask, her voice so faint Sarah had to lean close to hear. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." But the monitors told a different story, their numbers and lines painting a picture of a body failing despite its owner's determination. Standing there, watching Grace struggle for each breath, Sarah felt the weight of their years together, of all the sacrifices Grace had made for her. The woman who had given her everything was slipping away, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt completely helpless. She clutched the pocket watch at her neck, its steady ticking now a countdown to a deadline she couldn't bear to face. The harsh fluorescent lights of Memorial General Hospital cast stark shadows as Sarah met with Dr. Thompson in his cramped office. The aging doctor removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes as he laid out Grace's medical files on his cluttered desk. The thickness of the folder made Sarah's heart sink even before he began speaking. "Your grandmother's condition is more complicated than we initially thought," he explained, turning pages filled with charts and numbers Sarah couldn't comprehend. "The heart attack damaged significant portions of her cardiac muscle, but we've also discovered severe blockages in multiple arteries. She needs immediate intervention, but the type of treatment she requires..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's beyond what we can provide here." Sarah leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of his desk. "What do you mean? This is a hospital. You have to be able to help her." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear she was trying to suppress. Dr. Thompson pulled out a brochure from St. Mary's private hospital, its glossy pages featuring state-of-the-art medical equipment and smiling doctors in pristine white coats. "There's a new procedure," he continued, "a minimally invasive technique that could repair the damage and prevent future complications. The success rate is remarkably high, but it's only available at specialized cardiac centers like St. Mary's. The procedure itself, along with the post-operative care and medications." He wrote a number on a slip of paper and slid it across the desk. Sarah stared at the figure, the zeros blurring before her eyes. The amount was more money than she and Grace had seen in their entire lives combined. "There has to be another way," she whispered, mentally calculating their meager savings, knowing it wouldn't even cover a fraction of the cost. Dr. Thompson detailed their options, each alternative sounding worse than the last. Standard treatment at Memorial General might keep Grace alive, but the quality of life would be severely diminished. She would be bedridden, dependent on medications that would drain their limited resources, with no guarantee of long-term survival. Without the specialized treatment, he said gently, we're looking at a survival rate of less than 30% over the next 6 months, and even if she survives, she'll never be able to work again. The strain on her heart would be too great. The implications hit Sarah like physical blows. No more early morning sewing sessions, no more dancing in their tiny living room, no more of Grace's determined independence that had kept them afloat all these years. The thought of her vibrant grandmother reduced to a shell of herself was unbearable. Sarah spent the next hours in a daze making calls to every insurance company, social service agency, and charitable organization she could find. Each conversation ended the same way: polite regret, waiting lists, partial coverage that wouldn't come close to the amount needed. The hospital's financial aid office provided forms that seemed designed to crush hope with their requirements and restrictions. Returning to Grace's room, Sarah found her grandmother awake but weak, the oxygen mask fogging slightly with each labored breath. Grace beckoned her closer, her hand trembling as she reached for Sarah's. "I heard the nurses talking," she whispered, "about the cost. Promise me you won't worry about money. Promise me you'll let nature take its course." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she gripped Grace's hand. "Don't talk like that. We'll figure something out. We always do," but even as she spoke the words, she knew this was different from their usual financial struggles. This wasn't about making do with second-hand clothes or skipping meals to pay bills. This was Grace's life hanging in the balance. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in the hospital chapel seeking answers in its quiet solitude, she overheard 2 nurses discussing another patient who had received the same treatment Grace needed. The Andersons spared no expense, one said. "Must be nice to have that kind of money." Didn't even blink at the cost. The name hit Sarah like an electric shock, her hand automatically going to the pocket watch at her neck. The Anderson family crest seemed to burn against her skin, and for the first time she allowed herself to consider what had previously been unthinkable. If the watch truly belonged to the Andersons, if the birthmark meant what she suspected it might. Standing in front of the chapel's stained glass window, Sarah made a decision. Grace had saved her life 15 years ago. Now it was her turn to save Grace's, no matter what it took. Sarah returned to their apartment above the bakery late that night, the emptiness of the space echoing with Grace's absence. As she moved through their small home, each object seemed to hold a memory. Grace's reading glasses still perched on her unfinished sewing, a half-drunk cup of tea gone cold on the kitchen table, her worn slippers waiting faithfully by her favorite chair. Knowing sleep would be impossible, Sarah began organizing Grace's medications and paperwork, hoping to find anything that might help their situation. As she sorted through the drawer of Grace's bedside table, her fingers brushed against something hidden beneath the old bills and receipts, a wooden box she'd never seen before, its surface smooth with age. Inside, she found a collection of carefully preserved items: newspaper clippings, old photographs, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, the same shade as the one that had secured the pocket watch around her neck as a baby. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the first letter, the paper thin and delicate with age. "Dearest Emily," it began, the handwriting elegant and assured. "Your father remains unmoved. He threatens to disinherit me if I don't end things with you. But I won't let the Anderson name and fortune dictate my heart. We'll find a way to be together." The letter was signed simply W and dated 15 years ago. But Sarah's heart pounded as she read through the letters, each one revealing more pieces of a hidden story. They told of a forbidden romance between William Anderson, heir to the Anderson fortune, and Emily Carter, a young worker at the Anderson estate. Their love had bloomed in secret, defying social barriers and family expectations. The later letters grew increasingly desperate. "My beloved Emily," one read, "Father has discovered your condition. He's threatening to destroy your reputation if I don't comply with his wishes. I'm trying to find a way to protect you and our unborn child." The next few letters showed signs of having been crumpled and smoothed out again, tear stains blurring some of the ink. A newspaper clipping fell from between the letters, a small obituary that made Sarah's blood run cold. Emily Carter, age 22, passed away during childbirth. The date matched Sarah's birth exactly. Another clipping, dated a week later, reported the mysterious disappearance of William Anderson, who had reportedly left the country in grief. At the bottom of the box, Sarah found a final letter in different handwriting, addressed to Grace. "I know what they did to Emily," it read. "I can't prove it, but Richard Anderson was behind it all. The baby survived, but they'll never stop looking for her. Keep her safe. Keep the watch. It's her birthright and proof of who she is. When the time comes, the heart-shaped birthmark will confirm everything. I'm sorry I can't do more. Martha Anderson, housekeeper." Sarah sat on Grace's bed, surrounded by the evidence of a past she'd never known existed. The pocket watch felt heavier now, laden with the weight of its true significance. She remembered all the times Grace had started to tell her something about her parents but stopped, the way she'd insist on hiding the birthmark, her strange reaction whenever the Anderson name was mentioned in town. Running her fingers over the Anderson family crest on the watch, Sarah's mind raced with the implications. She wasn't just some abandoned child, she was William Anderson's daughter, hidden away to protect her from Richard Anderson's influence. The same Richard Anderson who now controlled the fortune that could save Grace's life. The irony was almost too much to bear. The family that had forced her mother into hiding, that had somehow contributed to her death, now held the key to saving the only mother Sarah had ever known. Grace had protected her all these years, keeping these secrets to ensure her safety. Now it was Sarah's turn to be brave. Dawn was breaking as Sarah carefully returned everything to the box, except for one letter that proved William's relationship with Emily. This she folded carefully and placed near her heart, alongside the watch. Looking in the mirror, she studied the birthmark she'd always tried to hide. Now it wasn't just a quirk of fate, it was evidence of her heritage, a key to saving Grace's life. The Anderson mansion loomed before Sarah like a fortress, its iron gates and manicured lawns creating an almost physical barrier between her world and theirs. She'd chosen her best outfit, a clean but worn blue dress that Grace had lovingly altered to fit her, and tried to tame her wild dark hair into something presentable. The silver pocket watch hung prominently at her neck, its weight both comforting and terrifying. Her first attempt at contact was through the intercom at the gate. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I need to speak with Mr. William Anderson or Mrs. Victoria Anderson. It's about family matters." The response was immediate and dismissive. "The Andersons don't take unscheduled visitors. Contact their office through proper channels." Sarah tried the official route, spending her lunch break at school using the library computer to email the Anderson Corporation. Her carefully worded message received an automated response. "Due to the high volume of inquiries, we cannot respond to personal requests." Her follow-up calls were blocked by layers of secretaries and assistants, each more dismissive than the last. Desperation mounting as Grace's condition worsened, Sarah began waiting outside the mansion gates each morning. She learned the family schedules. Victoria Anderson left at 8 a.m. in a sleek black car. Richard Anderson's driver collected him at 9. The gardeners came and went throughout the day. But each attempt to approach was thwarted by security guards who began to recognize her. "Listen, kid," one guard finally said, almost kindly, "you're not the first to try this. The Andersons get people claiming to be long-lost relatives all the time. Save yourself the trouble." His words stung, but the steady beeping of Grace's hospital monitors echoing in her memory gave Sarah courage to persist. She wrote letters, pouring her heart onto paper, explaining about Grace's condition, the pocket watch, the birthmark. She included copies of Emily's letters, her own birth certificate, everything she thought might prove her case. The letters were returned unopened, marked refused by recipient. One rainy morning, Sarah spotted Victoria Anderson walking to her car, umbrella held by a uniformed driver. Seizing her chance, Sarah darted forward, calling out, "Mrs. Anderson, please, just look at this watch. Look at my birthmark. I'm William's daughter, I can prove it." Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second, her perfectly composed face showing a flicker of something recognition. Fear? Before the security guards intervened. "Remove this girl," Victoria commanded, but her voice wavered slightly. "And make sure she understands that trespassing charges will be filed if this continues." As the guards led Sarah away, she caught Victoria staring at the pocket watch, her manicured hand unconsciously touching her own neck, where, Sarah had learned, her husband William had the same heart-shaped mark. Each rejection felt like a physical blow, but Sarah couldn't give up. Grace's condition was deteriorating daily, and the public hospital's resources were limited. During one visit, Sarah had overheard the doctors discussing how the specialized treatment at St. Mary's could have prevented the complications Grace was now developing. Sarah began spending her evenings researching the Andersons, learning everything she could about the family. William's disappearance 15 years ago had been a scandal, but his father Richard had maintained control of the family empire. Victoria, who'd been engaged to William before his disappearance, had married him upon his brief return a year later. There were rumors about his current whereabouts, but nothing concrete. After 2 weeks of failed attempts, Sarah received her first direct response, a cease and desist letter from the Anderson family lawyers. The official document threatened legal action if she continued her harassment of the family. Reading it under the harsh fluorescent lights of Grace's hospital room, Sarah felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. "Maybe we should stop," Emma suggested gently, visiting after school. There has to be another way, but watching Grace struggle for each breath, attached to machines that beeped with increasing urgency, Sarah knew she couldn't give up. The pocket watch ticked steadily against her chest, each sound a reminder of who she was and what she had to do. That night, as she walked home from the hospital, Sarah made a new plan. If the Andersons wouldn't listen to her pleas from outside their gates, she would have to find another way in. The answer came from an unexpected source, a help wanted. Notice posted by the Anderson estate's housekeeping staff. The Anderson mansion's servant entrance was far less imposing than the main gates, but Sarah's heart still pounded as she approached for her interview. She'd borrowed Emma's mother's best dress and carefully tucked the pocket watch inside her collar. Martha, the head housekeeper mentioned in the old letter, had retired years ago, but her replacement, Mrs. Hawkins, proved unexpectedly sympathetic during the initial screening. "We need someone for the evening shift," Mrs. Hawkins explained, eyeing Sarah's young face dubiously. "Mainly serving dinner and cleaning the formal dining room. You're quite young," but she paused, studying Sarah more closely. "There's something familiar about you. Have you worked in service before?" Before Sarah could respond, Victoria Anderson's voice echoed down the hallway. "Mrs. Hawkins, I need the..." She stopped abruptly upon seeing Sarah, recognition flashing across her perfectly composed features. The air in the servants' quarters seemed to freeze as the two studied each other. "You're that girl," Victoria said softly, her usual imperial tone absent. In the intimate space of the servants' hall, away from security guards and lawyers, something shifted in her expression. The one with the watch. Her eyes drifted to Sarah's neck, where the chain was barely visible. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her throat. "Please," she whispered, "I just need a chance to explain. My grandmother is dying," and to her surprise, tears began forming in Victoria's eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. "Follow me," Victoria commanded, leading Sarah to a small private study. The room was warmly lit, filled with books and family photographs. One caught Sarah's attention immediately, a younger William Anderson, his smile carefree, his neck bearing the same heart-shaped mark she carried. Victoria noticed her gaze. That was taken before. Before everything changed, she sank into a leather armchair, gesturing for Sarah to sit. I loved him, you know, William. We were engaged when he met your mother." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a deep sadness. "Did you know Sarah?" asked quietly. "About me." Victoria's hands twisted elegantly in her lap, her wedding ring catching the light. "I suspected. When William returned briefly after your mother's death, he was different, broken. He kept searching for someone but Richard. His father had hidden all traces." She looked directly at Sarah. "That birthmark, it's identical to his." For a moment, Victoria's carefully maintained facade cracked completely. She reached out, her manicured fingers gently touching Sarah's chin, turning her face to the light. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "I should have seen it immediately." The tender moment shattered as Richard Anderson's voice boomed from the hallway. Victoria's face transformed instantly, her walls slamming back into place. "You need to go," she said urgently, pressing a business card into Sarah's hand. "My private number. Call tomorrow morning." As Sarah was ushered quickly through the servants' entrance, she caught a final glimpse of Victoria's face, a complex mixture of fear, regret, and something that looked almost like hope. The business card felt like it was burning in her pocket, a potential lifeline for Grace. That night, Sarah sat by Grace's hospital bed, holding her grandmother's frail hand. The machines beeped steadily, marking time like her pocket watch. "I met her today, Grandma," she whispered. "Victoria Anderson. She saw him in me, maybe now." Her hopes were shattered the next morning when she called the number. Victoria's voice was once again cold and distant. "I've discussed it with Richard. We cannot help you. Please don't contact us again." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. Later that day, a package arrived at the hospital, an envelope containing enough money for 1 week of Grace's basic care at Memorial General, but nowhere near enough for the treatment at St. Mary's. The note inside, written in Victoria's elegant hand, read simply, "I'm sorry. This is all I can do." Sarah stood at the hospital window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The money in the envelope represented both kindness and defeat, enough to show Victoria cared, but not enough to truly help. The pocket watch ticked steadily against her chest, reminding her that somewhere in the city her father might still be out there. The autumn rain fell in sheets as Sarah made her final desperate attempt to reach the Andersons. Grace's condition had deteriorated rapidly, and the doctors had given her days, perhaps hours, without the specialized treatment. The money Victoria had sent was nearly gone, spent on basic medications that merely prolonged the inevitable. Standing outside the Anderson mansion's gates, soaked to the skin, Sarah felt a fever building in her own body. The nights spent sleeping in hospital chairs, the meals missed to save money, and the emotional strain had taken their toll. But she couldn't give up, not while Grace still fought for each breath. "Mr. Anderson," she called out, her voice carrying across the manicured lawns. "Please, just listen to me." Security cameras swiveled to focus on her, and she could see lights coming on inside the mansion. Richard Anderson's imposing figure appeared at a window, then vanished quickly into the depths of the house. The front door opened, and Richard Anderson himself emerged, flanked by security guards. He strode purposefully toward the gates, his expression thunderous. "You become a nuisance, young lady," he called out, his voice cutting through the rain. "I've been patient, but this ends now." Sarah pulled out the pocket watch, holding it up like a shield. "This belonged to your son. Look at it, really look at it." The inscription inside, the family crest, the rain, made the silver surface gleam under the security lights. Richard's face changed for a moment, recognition flickering in his eyes. "William's watch," he muttered, almost to himself. Then his expression hardened. "Which you must have stolen. Guards, call the police. This girl is a thief." The guards reached for their phones, but Sarah wasn't finished. She pulled down her collar, exposing the birthmark. "Explain this then," she challenged, her voice growing stronger. The same mark William has had, the same mark that runs in the Anderson family for generations. You know who I am, you've always known. Lightning flashed dramatically, illuminating the scene. Victoria appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "Richard, please," she called out. "Look at her, really look at her. She's his daughter." We all know it's true. Her voice carried a note of defiance that seemed to surprise even her. Richard spun toward his wife, rage distorting his features. "Be quiet. You know nothing." But Victoria was already walking toward them, her designer clothes becoming soaked in the rain. She reached through the gates, touching Sarah's face gently. "She has his eyes, Richard. His smile. You can't deny it anymore." Victoria's voice was soft but firm. "William would want us to help her." "William," Richard laughed bitterly. "William abandoned this family, ran off with that maid. And now her bastard child appears, wanting our money." He turned to Sarah, his voice venomous. "Your mother seduced my son, tried to trap him with a pregnancy. She got what she deserved." The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. "What did you do to my mother?" she whispered, sudden understanding dawning. "What did you do to Emily Carter?" Richard's face went pale, then red with fury. "Guards, remove this girl immediately, and if she returns, arrest her for trespassing." He turned on his heel, grabbing Victoria's arm roughly. "And you will discuss your disloyalty later." As the guards approached, Sarah made one final, desperate plea. "I don't care about your money or your name. My grandmother is dying, the woman who raised me when your family threw me away. She needs treatment at St. Mary's, treatment only you can afford. Please, she's all I have." Richard paused but didn't turn around. "We are not responsible for some woman who took in a stray. Your grandmother's condition is not our concern with that." He dragged Victoria back toward the house, leaving Sarah in the rain. The guards' hands were gentle as they led her away from the gates. One of them quietly pressed a tissue into her hand. "I'm sorry, miss," he whispered. "I remember your mother. She was kind to everyone here." Sarah stood on the sidewalk, rain mingling with her tears, watching the mansion's lights go out one by one. Her fever was rising, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. But in her heart, a new determination was forming. If the Andersons wouldn't help willingly, she would find another way. Grace had never given up on her, she wouldn't give up on Grace. The next week passed in a blur of increasingly desperate attempts to reach the Andersons. Sarah's fever, rather than subsiding, grew worse with each passing day. The wet cough that had started after the rainy confrontation at the mansion deepened, rattling in her chest like loose change. Still, she persisted. She began camping out in front of St. Mary's private hospital, knowing the Andersons had regular medical checkups there. The security guards, who initially tried to remove her, gradually became sympathetic to her presence. One of them, an older man named Frank, would sometimes bring her coffee in the early mornings. "You remind me of someone," he said one dawn, watching her suppress another coughing fit. Had the same look in her eyes, determined, like nothing could stop her. He paused, studying her face. "Emily Carter. Used to work at the Anderson estate. You're her daughter, aren't you?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew my mother." The coffee cup trembled in her shaking hands. Frank nodded slowly, his weathered face softening with memory. "Sweetest girl you'd ever meet. Worked in the mansion's library, keeping everything organized. William Anderson would spend hours in there, claiming to read. We all knew better." He smiled sadly. "When she disappeared, things changed. William was never the same." Sarah learned more about her mother in those early morning conversations than she had in 15 years. Emily had been brilliant, working at the mansion to save money for college. She'd loved poetry, always carrying a small book of verses in her pocket. The romance with William had bloomed slowly, built on shared books and quiet conversations. The day Richard Anderson found out Frank continued, everything fell apart. Emily was already pregnant by then. William wanted to marry her, consequences be damned. But Richard, he trailed off, something dark crossing his face. Richard Anderson has ways of making problems disappear. Between attempts to contact the Andersons, Sarah split her time between Grace's bedside and earning what money she could. Mrs. Miller kept her position at the bakery open, letting her work whatever hours she could manage. The regular customers, hearing about Grace's condition, began leaving extra tips, though Sarah's pride made accepting them difficult. Her own health continued to decline. The cough worsened, accompanied by chest pains that made breathing increasingly difficult. Emma begged her to see a doctor, but Sarah refused to spend money on herself, while Grace needed every penny they could gather. "You can't help Grace if you're sick too," Emma argued, watching Sarah lean against the hospital wall for support, her face flushed with fever. But Sarah merely shook her head, saving her breath for the next attempt to convince anyone at St. Mary's to help them. One morning, Sarah spotted William Anderson's name on a patient list left carelessly on a nurse's station. Her heart leaped. After 15 years, her father was back in Boston. But further investigation revealed it was just Richard Anderson using his son's name for some private medical matter, a cruel twist that left Sarah feeling more hopeless than ever. The pocket watch became her talisman, its steady ticking a reminder of why she couldn't give up. Sometimes, in the quiet hours between Grace's vital checks, Sarah would hold it close and talk to the father she'd never known. "Where are you?" she would whisper. "Why did you leave? Did you ever try to find me?" Victoria Anderson appeared at the hospital several times that week, but always managed to avoid Sarah, though their eyes would meet briefly across the lobby. Once, Sarah caught her making a furtive phone call, speaking in hushed tones about William and his daughter. But security interrupted before she could hear more. As her fever climbed and her cough deepened, Sarah began to experience moments of disorientation. During one such episode, she thought she saw William Anderson himself walking through the hospital corridor, but when her vision cleared, there was only an empty hallway. "Your mother never gave up either," Frank told her one morning, pressing another cup of coffee into her trembling hands. Not until the very end his words, meant as encouragement, carried a warning Sarah chose to ignore. She couldn't afford to think about endings, not while Grace still had a chance. Martha Henderson had served the Anderson family for over 30 years before her retirement, and the habits of discretion died hard. When she first spotted Sarah outside the mansion gates, the girl's resemblance to Emily Carter had stopped her heart for a moment. Now, watching from her small apartment window across from St. Mary's Hospital, she knew she could no longer remain silent. "Come inside," Child Martha called out to Sarah one particularly cold morning. "Before that cough of yours gets any worse." Her small apartment smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread, reminding Sarah painfully of home. Martha's keen eyes took in Sarah's feverish appearance, the way she struggled to catch her breath. "You look just like her," Martha said softly, setting a cup of hot tea in front of Sarah. Emily. She had that same way of lifting her chin when she was determined about something. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for an old photo album. "I've been watching you these past weeks, trying to decide what to do." Inside the album were carefully preserved photographs that made Sarah's heart skip. Emily Carter, young and beautiful, arranging books in the Anderson library. William Anderson, looking at her with undisguised adoration. The two of them in the garden, unaware they were being photographed, their happiness radiating from the faded images. "I was there through all of it," Martha explained, her voice heavy with old grief. "The secret meetings, the hidden letters. When Richard found out about the pregnancy, I helped them plan their escape. But something went wrong." She closed her eyes, remembering. Richard had his men following them. They caught up at the hospital where Emily was giving birth. Sarah learned how Martha had tried to protect her mother, how she'd arranged for Grace, then a hospital cleaner, to take the baby to safety. "Your mother's last words were your name," Martha revealed, tears in her eyes. She made me promise you'd be safe from Richard. William. He disappeared that night. Some say Richard sent him abroad, others think worse. The old housekeeper reached into a drawer, pulling out a key ring. The service entrance, she explained, and the library where your parents fell in love. Richard never changed the locks, too confident in his own power. Her eyes met Sarah's. I can get you inside, give you access to Richard's private papers. There might be something there to help your case. Despite her illness, Sarah felt hope flickering to life. Why are you helping me now, she asked. Martha's answer was simple: because I should have done more 15 years ago. And because Grace Stevens saved you when I couldn't save your mother. Over the next few days, Martha provided more than just keys. She shared inside knowledge of the mansion's routines, the staff schedules, Richard's habits. She knew which floorboards creaked, which security cameras had blind spots when the guards changed shifts. Richard keeps his most important papers in the library desk, Martha explained, sketching a rough map. Third drawer down, false bottom. He thinks no one knows about it, but I've cleaned that room for 3 decades. She smiled grimly. A good housekeeper knows everything that happens in her house. Sarah's fever worried Martha, who tried to convince her to rest, to wait until she was stronger. But Grace's condition was deteriorating too rapidly for delay. Each visit to the hospital showed her grandmother growing weaker, the machines working harder to keep her alive. At least let me give you something dry to wear, Martha insisted, pulling out what looked like new clothes. At Sarah's questioning look, she explained, I've been buying things over the years. Things I thought Emily's daughter might need someday, just in case. The care with which Martha had preserved these memories, had prepared for a moment she wasn't sure would ever come, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Here was someone else who had loved her mother, who had carried the weight of that tragic night for 15 years. Tomorrow night, Martha decided, checking her calendar. Richard has a board meeting, Victoria has her charity function, and I know for a fact 3 guards called in sick with flu. It's your best chance. She pressed a small vial into Sarah's hand. Peppermint oil for your cough. Emily used to use it too. As Sarah left Martha's apartment, the old housekeeper called after her softly, you have her courage, you know, and his determination. Don't let Richard win again. The words followed Sarah into the gathering darkness, strengthening her resolve despite her fevered shivers. The pieces of Sarah's connection to the Anderson family began falling into place like a complex puzzle. In the week following Martha's revelations, evidence seemed to appear from unexpected sources, each new discovery making the connection harder to deny. Dr. Thompson at Memorial General, reviewing Grace's old records, found a notation from the night Sarah was brought in as a baby. Infant delivered at St. Mary's Private Hospital, he read aloud, frowning. Transferred under unusual circumstances. Attending physician Dr. James Morrison, the same Dr. Morrison who had been the Andersons' family physician for decades. Emma, determined to help, spent hours in the public library's newspaper archives. She discovered a small article from 15 years ago, Anderson Air Cancels Society Wedding, Family Cites Health Concerns. The date coincided exactly with the time William had disappeared. More telling was the photo accompanying the article, William at a charity gala, the heart-shaped birthmark visible above his collar. The hospital staff at St. Mary's began noticing too. An elderly nurse, Sister Margaret, pulled Sarah aside one morning. I was there the night you were born, she whispered, glancing around nervously. Such a commotion, men in dark suits everywhere, and poor Emily, she crossed herself, unable to continue. Even the mansion's current staff started treating Sarah differently. The gardener, trimming hedges near the gate, would pause to study her face. You have the same way of standing, he observed quietly. Just like Mr. William, one hand in your pocket, head tilted slightly. Can't be taught, that sort of thing. Martha provided the most compelling evidence from her years of careful observation. She brought out William's old journals, secretly preserved from Richard's attempts to erase all traces of that time. The entry spoke of his love for Emily, his plans for their future, his excitement about becoming a father. "Look at this," Martha said one evening, showing Sarah a sketch William had made. It showed a young woman, Emily, reading in the library, her hand unconsciously touching a heart-shaped mark on her child's neck in the margins. The date was just weeks before Sarah's birth. The pocket watch, when Martha examined it, revealed more secrets. This was William's grandfather's, she explained, opening a hidden compartment in the case that Sarah had never discovered. Inside was a tiny photograph of William and Emily, clearly in love, clearly expecting a child. Victoria Anderson's behavior, too, seemed to confirm Sarah's identity. The staff reported hearing arguments between her and Richard, words like responsibility and William's child echoing through the mansion's halls. Once she was seen placing flowers at Emily's unmarked grave, roses matching those from the Anderson gardens. But Frank, the security guard, contributed his own memories. "The night you were born," he recalled, "William was frantic to get into the hospital. Richard's men held him back. He kept shouting about his baby, his daughter. Next day he was gone, and we were all told never to speak of it." Sarah's own appearance provided daily proof. As her fever worsened, her features seemed to sharpen, making her resemblance to William even more striking. The same deep brown eyes, the same determined set of the jaw, even the same habit of running fingers through her hair when worried. Dr. Morrison himself finally broke his silence, though he refused to put anything in writing. That night, he told Sarah during a chance encounter in the hospital corridor, "Your father tried everything to reach your mother. Richard's men were too many." The next thing we knew, William had vanished overseas, and Emily. He shook his head sadly. Some secrets eat at a man's conscience. The most startling evidence came from an unexpected source. One of Richard's own security guards, moved by Sarah's dedication to Grace, anonymously delivered copies of old security footage. The tapes showed William and Emily in happier times, but more importantly, they showed Richard's rage upon discovering the pregnancy, his threatening gestures, his harsh words about taking care of the problem. Each new piece of evidence seemed to draw Sarah closer to the truth while simultaneously highlighting the walls Richard had built to keep her out. The proof of her identity was overwhelming, yet Richard's power and influence kept justice at bay. The morning Sarah's body finally betrayed her dawned cold and grey. 3 weeks of sleeping in hospital chairs, irregular meals, and constant stress had taken their toll. Her fever, which had been steadily climbing, reached dangerous levels, and the cough that had started in the rain outside the Anderson mansion had developed into full-blown pneumonia. Still, she dragged herself to St. Mary's Private Hospital, knowing William Anderson had an appointment that day. Martha's intelligence had been reliable. His name was on the patient list, though Sarah's fever-addled mind couldn't be sure if this was just another instance of Richard using his son's name. "You look like death warmed over," Frank said gently, pressing a cup of hot coffee into her trembling hands. She could barely hold it, her fingers shaking so badly that the liquid sloshed over the rim. The security guard's face creased with concern. "Maybe it's time to go home, get some rest." "Can't," Sarah whispered, her voice raw from coughing. Grace needs she couldn't finish the sentence before another coughing fit doubled her over. When she pulled her hand away from her mouth, there were spots of red on her palm that she quickly wiped away, hoping Frank hadn't noticed. The morning crawled by with no sign of either William or Richard Anderson. Sarah's vision began to blur around the edges, the hospital's pristine white walls seeming to pulse in time with her racing heart. The pocket watch felt impossibly heavy against her chest, its ticking growing louder in her ears until it drowned out everything else. At noon, Victoria Anderson's sleek car pulled up to the hospital entrance. Sarah pushed herself off the bench where she'd been resting, but her legs buckled beneath her. She caught herself against the wall, leaving a sweaty handprint on the immaculate surface. "Mrs. Anderson," she called out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. Victoria turned, her perfect composure faltering as she took in Sarah's condition. For a moment, genuine concern flashed across her face, but then Richard appeared behind her, and her expression shuttered closed. Sarah tried to step forward, to make one last plea, but the world tilted sideways. The fever that had been building for weeks finally reached its peak, sending waves of fire through her body. The medical terms she'd overheard in Grace's hospital room floated through her mind: bilateral pneumonia, respiratory distress, critical condition. Please, she managed to gasp, reaching out toward the Andersons. Grace is dying. But the rest of her words were lost in another violent coughing fit that brought her to her knees. Through watering eyes, she saw Victoria take an instinctive step toward her, only to be held back by Richard's iron grip on her arm. The world began to fade in and out, like a badly tuned television. Sarah was vaguely aware of voices around her, Frank calling for medical help, Victoria's muffled protest, Richard's cold commands to leave the girl alone. The pocket watch slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor and spinning like a silver top on the polished tiles. As consciousness began to slip away, Sarah saw her mother's face not from photographs, but as she imagined her, young and beautiful and full of love. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the words actually left her lips. "I tried, Mom. I tried to save her." The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Victoria Anderson breaking free from Richard's grasp, running toward her with genuine fear on her face. The last thing she felt was the cold hospital floor against her burning skin. The last thing she heard was the steady ticking of the pocket watch, counting down moments she could no longer hold on to. Then everything went black, and Sarah Mitchell, daughter of William Anderson and Emily Carter, granddaughter of Grace Stevens, keeper of a silver pocket watch, and bearer of a heart-shaped birthmark, collapsed fully onto the hospital floor. Above her, the expensive shoes of the people who could have saved Grace clicked against the tiles, their owners frozen in a tableau of wealth and indecision, while the life of a 15-year-old girl hung in the balance. Victoria Anderson had spent 15 years crafting a perfect facade of indifference, but watching Sarah collapse shattered that mask completely. As the girl lay unconscious on the hospital floor, memories Victoria had long suppressed came flooding back: William's joy about becoming a father, Emily's kind smile, the sound of a baby crying on that terrible night. "Someone call emergency services," she shouted, already kneeling beside Sarah despite Richard's attempts to stop her. The girl's skin burned with fever, her breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The pocket watch, William's watch, lay just beyond her outstretched fingers, its silver surface reflecting the harsh hospital lights. "Leave her," Richard commanded. This is exactly the kind of spectacle she wanted to create, but Victoria wasn't listening. She was staring at Sarah's face, seeing for the first time how the girl's features mirrored William's in sleep, the same curve of the jaw, the same dark lashes against pale skin. Frank, the security guard, was already calling for help. "Temperatures dangerously high," one of the responding nurses reported. "Severe pneumonia, possible sepsis." The medical terms fell like accusations on Victoria's ears. This child, William's child, had made herself sick, trying to save her grandmother while they had turned their backs. "She needs immediate treatment," the doctor announced after a quick examination. "ICU care, aggressive antibiotics." He looked up at Victoria, who was still cradling Sarah's head. "Does she have family we should contact?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. Family. This girl was William's daughter, which made her family. All these weeks, they'd rejected her, forced her to beg, watched her deteriorate while they hid behind lawyers and security guards. "I'm her stepmother," Victoria heard herself say, the words emerging before she could stop them. Richard's sharp intake of breath behind her meant there would be consequences, but for once she didn't care. "Treat her. Whatever she needs, I'll take full responsibility." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah was rushed to the ICU, connected to machines that breathed for her while antibiotics fought the infection raging through her system. Victoria remained by her bedside, ignoring Richard's increasingly angry calls and messages. Her grandmother Victoria remembered suddenly, turning to Frank, who had stayed nearby. "At Memorial General. Someone needs to tell her what's happened." The guard nodded, already pulling out his phone, but Victoria stopped him. "No, I'll go. I need to see for myself what we've done." The contrast between the two hospitals was stark. Memorial General's worn corridors and overworked staff made St. Mary's look like a luxury hotel. Victoria found Grace's room easily. It was the one where a small vase of wildflowers sat on the windowsill, picked by Sarah during her daily walks between hospitals. Grace was awake, her worried eyes fixing on Victoria the moment she entered. No introductions were needed. Sarah had described her stepmother to be well enough. "Where is she?" Grace asked simply, her voice weak but direct. "What's happened to my girl?" Victoria's composure cracked entirely. She told Grace everything about Sarah's collapse, her condition, but also about the weeks of rejection, the ignored pleas, the cold dismissals. "I should have helped sooner," she finished, tears streaming down her face. "We all should have helped." Grace listened silently, her face showing more concern for Sarah than for her own obviously failing health. When Victoria finished, the older woman reached out with a trembling hand. "Then help now," she said softly. "It's not too late to do the right thing." Returning to St. Mary's, Victoria made 2 calls. The first was to her lawyer, instructing him to begin transfer paperwork to move Grace to St. Mary's immediately. The second was to a number she'd kept hidden in her phone for 15 years, William's last known contact in Europe. Standing at Sarah's bedside, watching the girl fight for each breath, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. Richard could threaten, rage, or disown her. She didn't care anymore. She had spent 15 years being complicit in his cruelty. Watching Sarah's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, Victoria Anderson finally chose a side. William Anderson's return to St. Mary's Hospital caused a sensation. He arrived in the early hours of the morning, having taken the first flight from London after Victoria's call. 15 years of exile had left their mark. His hair was greying at the temples, and lines of grief had etched themselves around his eyes, but the heart-shaped birthmark on his neck remained unchanged. He paused in the doorway of Sarah's ICU room, his breath catching at the sight of his daughter. Even unconscious, connected to machines that breathed for her, the resemblance to Emily was unmistakable. Victoria, who had maintained her vigil by Sarah's bedside, quietly stood to leave, but William caught her arm. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "For calling me, for saving her." Victoria nodded, tears in her eyes. She had already told him everything about Sarah's desperate attempts to reach them, about Grace's condition, about Richard's cruelty. Now, watching him approach his daughter's bedside with trembling hands, she saw 15 years of pain etched in every movement. "She has Emily's nose," he said softly, touching Sarah's fever-flushed cheek. "And her determination." His fingers found the chain of the pocket watch, still hanging around Sarah's neck. "I looked for her, for years. But Richard, he hid everything so well." The monitors beeped steadily as William pulled a chair close to the bed, taking Sarah's limp hand in his. The sight of their matching birthmarks, his darkened by sun, hers pale against her hospital gown, made Victoria's heart clench. They were undeniably father and daughter, reunited in the worst possible circumstances. "I'm here now," Sarah William murmured, his voice breaking. "Dad's here. I'm so sorry it took me so long." As if responding to his voice, Sarah's fingers twitched slightly in his grasp. Her eyelids fluttered, and slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes. For a moment she stared at William in confusion, her fever-bright eyes struggling to focus. Then her gaze found his birthmark, identical to her own, and understanding dawned. "Dad," she whispered, the word barely audible through the oxygen mask. "You came." William's composure shattered completely. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm never leaving again." Tears streamed down his face, as he pressed her hand to his cheek. "I've been looking for you for so long." Sarah tried to speak again, but coughing overtook her. When she could catch her breath, she managed to gasp out one word. Grace. William nodded immediately, understanding her concern. "Victoria's already arranged everything. She's being transferred here to receive the same treatment you're getting. She's going to be fine." Relief flooded Sarah's face, and she relaxed slightly against the pillows. "Emily?" she asked next, her eyes searching his face. William's heart broke all over again at having to tell his daughter about her mother, but Sarah squeezed his hand weakly. "I know," she whispered. "Martha told me. Not your fault." The next hours were filled with soft conversations as Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. William told her about her mother, how they met, their secret romance, their plans for a family. Sarah, in her brief moments of lucidity, told him about growing up with Grace, about finding the letters, about her desperate attempts to reach him. Victoria watched from the doorway as father and daughter began the slow process of healing 15 years of separation. She saw how William's face lit up when Sarah smiled, how carefully he adjusted her oxygen mask, how tenderly he brushed her hair back from her forehead. It was the expression of a father who had found his missing piece. When the doctor came to check Sarah's condition, the news was cautiously optimistic. The antibiotics were working, her fever was finally dropping, and her breathing was showing improvement. "She's a fighter," the doctor remarked. William smiled through his tears, just like her mother. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah fell into a healing sleep, her hand still clasped in her father's. The pocket watch ticked steadily on the bedside table, no longer a mystery but a bridge between past and present, between loss and reunion. William Anderson sat guard over his daughter's sleep, making up for 15 years of missed moments, while outside the door, Victoria began the process of making things right. Richard Anderson's arrival at St. Mary's Hospital shattered the peaceful reunion like a stone through glass. He burst into Sarah's room, his face contorted with a rage that had been brewing for 15 years. William stood protectively between his father and Sarah's bed, while Victoria pressed herself against the wall, watching the confrontation unfold. "So the prodigal son returns," Richard sneered, his expensive suit failing to mask the dangerous tension in his stance. "And for what? A bastard child and her dying caretaker," his words dripped with venom, each syllable calculated to wound. "That's enough," Father William warned, but Richard was beyond stopping. 15 years of carefully maintained secrets were unraveling, and he seemed determined to inflict as much damage as possible in their collapse. "You want to know what really happened that night?" Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Why your precious Emily died, why you were forced to leave. Let me tell you exactly what I did to protect the Anderson name from disgrace." Sarah, though weak, pushed herself up in the hospital bed, her eyes fixed on her grandfather. The monitors beside her beeped faster, reflecting her rising distress. William tried to stop his father, but Richard continued, his confession spilling out like poison. "I had her followed, your Emily. Had my men watch her every move once I discovered she was pregnant. When she went into labor, it was simple enough to ensure she was taken to a specific hospital, with a specific doctor who owed me considerable favors." He smiled coldly. "Complications in childbirth are so tragically common, aren't they?" The room fell deadly silent except for the steady beeping of Sarah's heart monitor. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth in horror, while William's face drained of all color. You murdered her?" he whispered, his voice shaking with rage and grief. "Murder is such an ugly word," Richard replied, straightening his tie with steady hands. "I simply ensured that a problem was taken care of. The child wasn't supposed to survive either, but that interfering nurse Grace Stevens smuggled her out before my men could complete their task." Sarah's monitors began beeping more rapidly as she struggled to breathe, the shock of Richard's revelation affecting her already weakened state. William moved to comfort her, but Richard wasn't finished. "And you, my dear son," he continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You were so easy to manipulate in your grief. A few doctored reports about Emily's accident, a carefully worded threat about what might happen to your child if you stayed. You ran exactly as I planned, leaving me to maintain the Anderson legacy without your romantic foolishness. The full horror of Richard's actions hung in the air like a physical presence. Years of manipulation, calculated cruelty, and cold-blooded murder, all to protect his notion of family honor. William's hands clenched into fists, his entire body trembling with suppressed rage. "You took everything from me," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "My love, my child, my life. And now you've tried to destroy Sarah too, refusing her help while Grace lay dying. When does it end, Father?" Richard's response was chilling in its casualness. "It ends when I say it ends. The Anderson name means something in this city. I won't have it tainted by illegitimate offspring and criminal investigations into ancient history. The girl can have her treatment and her precious Grace too if she agrees to disappear afterward. That's my final offer, boy." Sarah, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke. Her voice was weak but clear. "You killed my mother. You separated me from my father. You made Grace suffer just to maintain your precious reputation." Each word seemed to cost her tremendous effort. "You're not offering mercy, you're trying to buy your way out of justice." Richard's face darkened dangerously. "You're just like your mother, too stupid to know when to take a good deal." He took a step towards Sarah's bed, but William moved to block him, father and son facing each other in a standoff 15 years in the making. The truth was out now, hanging in the hospital room like a thundercloud about to break. Richard Anderson had orchestrated not just a death, but 15 years of separation and suffering, all in the name of family pride. The question of what would happen next balanced on a knife's edge, as delicate as Sarah's recovering health, as precious as Grace's chance for survival. The truth about Emily Carter's death emerged in fragments over the next hours, each revelation more devastating than the last. Martha, summoned to the hospital by Victoria, brought with her a weathered leather journal, Emily's private diary, preserved in secret for 15 years. Through Emily's own words, written in an increasingly shaky hand as her pregnancy progressed, the full extent of Richard Anderson's cruelty became clear. She had documented everything: the threatening phone calls, the men who followed her to work, the mysterious accidents that seemed to happen whenever she refused to leave town. "They're trying to scare me away," she had written in one of her final entries. "But this baby is all that matters now. William's baby. Our baby. I'll protect her with my last breath if I have to." The prophecy of those words sent chills through everyone in the room. Sister Margaret, the elderly nurse who had been present that night, finally broke her decades-long silence. She described how Richard's men had infiltrated the hospital staff, how the doctor had been paid to look the other way during critical moments of Emily's labor. The complications had been carefully orchestrated, designed to seem natural while ensuring a tragic outcome. She knew something was wrong, Sister Margaret recalled, her voice trembling. She kept asking for William, kept saying she needed to protect her baby. Her last words were save her. Save Sarah, then everything happened so fast. The old nurse's eyes filled with tears. Grace was cleaning the hallway when she heard the baby cry. She acted on instinct, wrapped the child in her cleaning smock, and ran. William, listening to these accounts of his love's final moments, aged years in hours. The knowledge that Emily had died calling his name, that he had been deliberately kept away during her greatest need, seemed to physically pain him. Sarah reached for his hand from her hospital bed, father and daughter sharing grief for the woman they had both lost. Victoria contributed her own piece to the tragic puzzle. "Richard made me complicit," she confessed, unable to meet William's eyes. "He told me if I married you, kept quiet about Emily, he would ensure the baby was placed with a good family. I believed him. By the time I realized he had intended something far worse, you were gone, and I was trapped in his web of lies." But it was the hospital security footage from that night, preserved by a guilty guard and delivered anonymously, that provided the final damning evidence. The grainy video showed Richard Anderson himself in the hospital corridor, speaking with a group of men in dark suits. His gestures were clear, his intentions unmistakable. Later footage showed these same men preventing William from entering the hospital, while inside Emily fought for her life. Martha brought forward additional proof bank records showing large payments to the doctor who had attended Emily, to the men who had followed her, to officials who had helped bury the truth. Richard Anderson's network of corruption had been extensive and thorough, designed to eliminate all traces of what he considered a threat to his family's reputation. The most heartbreaking evidence came from Emily's personal effects, which Martha had saved from destruction. A small box contained ultrasound pictures, a tiny knitted booty, and a letter addressed to her unborn child. My dearest Sarah, yes, I already know you're a girl, and I already know your name. If anything happens to me, never doubt that you are wanted, loved, cherished. Your father and I planned a beautiful life for you. If fate has other plans, know that you were the best of both of us, our greatest dream, our deepest love. As these pieces of the past came together, Sarah's fever finally broke, as if the truth itself had healing properties. She lay in her hospital bed, holding her mother's letter, while William sat beside her, his face marked by tears and determination. The full weight of Richard's crimes lay exposed, not just Emily's death, but 15 years of orchestrated separation, of deliberate cruelty, of lives destroyed in the name of family pride. The pocket watch ticked steadily on Sarah's bedside table, marking time as justice inched closer. Outside the hospital room, Victoria was already on the phone with her lawyers, while Martha compiled her evidence for the authorities. The truth about Emily Carter's death would no longer remain buried in the past. The confrontation between William and Richard Anderson took place in the hospital's private conference room, away from Sarah's recovery room. The space, designed for delicate medical discussions, now contained decades of suppressed rage and betrayal. All these years, William began, his voice dangerously quiet, I believed Emily's death was a tragic accident. I blamed myself for not being there, for not protecting her. His hands gripped the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. But you orchestrated everything. Her death, my exile, Sarah's separation, it was all part of your plan. Richard stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the city skyline he'd spent a lifetime dominating. I did what was necessary to protect this family's legacy. That girl, Emily, she would have destroyed everything we built. Her child would have been a constant reminder of your weakness. William's laugh was hollow, bitter. Legacy. You talk about legacy while standing in the hospital where you murdered an innocent woman, where you tried to have my newborn daughter killed. He moved closer to his father, each step measured and deliberate. What kind of legacy is built on blood and lies? Don't be dramatic, Richard scoffed, though he took an instinctive step backward. Emily's death was regrettable but necessary. The girl survived, didn't she? And now she can be properly compensated for her silence. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. William's voice rose for the first time. Emily is dead. I lost 15 years with my daughter. Grace nearly died trying to protect Sarah from your legacy, and you think money can fix this? The conference room door opened and Victoria entered with a thick folder. The police are on their way, she announced quietly. I've given them everything, Martha's evidence, the hospital records, the payment trails. It's over, Richard. Richard's composed facade cracked slightly. You would destroy your own family? For what, revenge? Misplaced guilt? He turned to William, his voice taking on a manipulative tone. Son, think about what this will do to the Anderson name. Think about Sarah's future. Sarah's future, William advanced on his father. You mean the future you tried to steal from her? The one where she grew up without parents because of your actions? His voice shook with fury. I'm thinking about Sarah's future right now, a future where she knows the truth about her mother, where justice is served, where men like you can't destroy lives for the sake of reputation. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Richard's face transformed, showing for the first time the true darkness that had driven his actions. "You're a fool, William. Always have been. That girl and her mother, they were beneath us. I did what any father would do to protect his son from throwing his life away." "No," William replied, his voice steady now. "You did what a monster would do. A father protects his children. A father cherishes his grandchild. You're just a murderer in an expensive suit." The police arrived moments later, their presence filling the sterile hospital corridor with grim purpose. As they led Richard away, reading him his rights, he maintained his aristocratic bearing. But his final words to William revealed the depth of his corruption. "You'll regret this. The Anderson name will be ruined." William watched his father being escorted away, feeling the weight of 15 years of deception lifting from his shoulders. Victoria touched his arm gently. "Go to Sarah," she said softly. "She needs her father now more than ever." Returning to Sarah's room, William found her awake, looking stronger than she had in days. Grace had been moved to the room next door, her treatment finally underway. The sight of his daughter, Emily's daughter, alive and healing filled William with a fierce determination. "Is it really over?" Sarah asked as he sat beside her. William took her hand, noticing how perfectly it fit in his, just as Emily's had. "The truth is out," he assured her, "and no one will ever separate us again." The pocket watch on the bedside table ticked steadily, no longer counting lost time, but marking the beginning of healing, of justice, of family rebuilt from the ashes of Richard's destruction. The news of Richard Anderson's accident reached St. Mary's Hospital just hours after his arrest. Released on bail due to his considerable influence, he had been driving his Bentley recklessly through the rain-slicked streets, perhaps seeking escape from the inevitable scandal. The car had skidded on a sharp turn, crashing through the guardrail of the same bridge where Emily had often met William in secret years ago. Frank, still on duty at the hospital entrance, was the first to inform William. "They've taken him to emergency," he reported, his face grim. "It's bad, Mr. Anderson. The doctors. They don't think he'll make it through the night." The irony of Richard Anderson ending up in the same hospital where he had orchestrated Emily's death was lost on no one. Sarah, still weak but recovering, insisted on seeing her grandfather. "I need to understand," she told her father, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Before it's too late, William wanted to protect her from any more pain, but he recognized Emily's determination in their daughter's eyes. Richard lay broken in the ICU, machines beeping a countdown of his final hours. The powerful man who had destroyed so many lives now looked small and vulnerable, his perfectly tailored suit replaced by a hospital gown, his commanding presence diminished by tubes and wires. When he opened his eyes to find Sarah and William by his bedside, something shifted in his expression. Perhaps it was the proximity of death, or perhaps the sight of his son and granddaughter together finally broke through decades of pride and prejudice. His first words came as a whisper, "You look so much like her." Sarah moved closer, William's supportive hand on her shoulder. Richard's eyes fixed on their matching birthmarks, visible now that neither tried to hide them. "I thought I was protecting our legacy," he continued, his voice rough with pain and something that might have been regret. "But I destroyed it instead, didn't I?" "Why?" Sarah asked simply. "Why did you hate us so much?" The question hung in the air, heavy with 15 years of suffering. Richard turned his face away, but not before they saw tears in his eyes, perhaps the first he'd shed in decades. "I was wrong," he admitted, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. "About everything. Emily. She would have enhanced our family, not diminished it. And you," he looked at Sarah, really looked at her, perhaps seeing her for the first time. "You're every inch an Anderson. The best of William, the best of Emily. I was too blind to see it." From his bedside table, he gestured weakly toward a folder. William opened it to find legal documents, papers signing over control of the Anderson empire to him, new documents acknowledging Sarah as his legitimate heir, and most surprisingly, evidence that would support the case against those who had helped him orchestrate Emily's death. "It won't make up for what I did," Richard said, his breathing becoming more labored. "Nothing can, but perhaps it can give you a foundation to build something better, something worthy of Emily's memory and of Sarah's future." The machines began beeping more urgently as Richard's condition deteriorated. In his final moments, he reached for Sarah's hand. She hesitated, but then took it, feeling the weakness in his grip. "Your mother," he whispered. "She used to sing in the library when she thought no one could hear. Beautiful voice, like angels." His last words were directed at William. "I'm sorry, son. Take care of them both, your daughter and our legacy. Make it something good this time." Then Richard Anderson, who had spent a lifetime building walls between people, closed his eyes for the final time. Sarah stood by the window afterward, watching the city lights flicker in the rain. "Do you think he really changed?" she asked her father. At the end, William joined her, their reflections ghost-like in the glass. "I think death has a way of stripping away the lies we tell ourselves," he replied. "Your mother would say everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even if it comes too late." The pocket watch ticked softly in Sarah's pocket, marking the end of one chapter in their family's story and the beginning of another. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, as if preparing it for a fresh start. The hidden documents that sealed Richard Anderson's confession came to light in the days following his death. Martha, armed with the keys to his private study, led William and Victoria through the maze of the Anderson mansion's inner sanctum. The room, dark with heavy wooden paneling, held secrets in every drawer. "He kept everything," Martha explained, pulling out files from a hidden safe behind an oil painting. Richard Anderson was many things, but disorganized wasn't one of them. He documented every move he made against Emily, perhaps as insurance against those he'd involved in his scheme. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Bank statements showed payments to the doctor who had deliberately mishandled Emily's care during childbirth. Correspondence revealed the network of corrupt officials who had helped cover up the truth. Most chilling were the surveillance reports detailing Emily's every move in the weeks before Sarah's birth. Victoria discovered a leather-bound diary in Richard's desk, its pages filled with his meticulous planning. "He wrote about it like a business transaction," she said, her voice shaking as she read. Cold, calculated entries about removing the problem and protecting the Anderson name. He even noted down how much it would cost to buy people's silence. Among the papers was a file marked simply Emily. Inside, William found photographs he'd never seen before. Emily in the mansion's library, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. Emily and William together in the garden, caught in a moment of unguarded happiness. Emily on her last day alive, her face glowing with the anticipation of motherhood. She knew they were watching her, Martha said softly, showing them a letter Emily had written to William the day before she went into labor. But she was determined to protect Sarah. She wrote here that no matter what happened to her, the baby had to survive. She made me promise to make sure of it. The most shocking discovery was a series of letters between Richard and Victoria's father, revealing how they had orchestrated Victoria's marriage to William after Emily's death. "He used my grief against me," William realized, reading the correspondence. "Made me believe marrying Victoria was the only way to protect the family, while all along." Victoria touched his arm gently. "We were both pawns in his game," she said, "but we can make it right now. These documents ensure justice for Emily and security for Sarah's future." One envelope, sealed and never sent, contained a letter from Richard to Emily, dated just days before her death. In it, he offered her a substantial sum to disappear with her unborn child, to never contact William again. Emily's response, scribbled in her determined hand across the bottom: "Some things are worth more than money. My child deserves to know her father, and William deserves to know his daughter. No amount of wealth can buy my silence or my absence." Legal documents revealed that Richard had already begun the process of transferring control of the Anderson empire to William and acknowledging Sarah as a legitimate heir. His final act of conscience, perhaps, or an attempt at redemption. The most poignant discovery came last: a small box containing Emily's personal effects that Richard had ordered removed from her apartment after her death. Inside, William found the other half of the pocket watch's set, its surface engraved with the words, "For our daughter Sarah. May she inherit her father's strength and her mother's heart." Sarah, who had been quietly absorbing all these revelations, picked up a photograph of her mother. "She was beautiful," she said softly, "and brave. She died protecting me." William pulled his daughter close, both of them drawing strength from each other as they faced the weight of their family's tragic history. Martha gathered the documents carefully, organizing them for the authorities. "Emily would be proud," she said, "watching father and daughter together. This is what she fought for you two to find each other, for the truth to come out." As they left Richard's study, William took one last look around the room that had housed so many secrets. The truth had finally emerged, not in fragments and whispers, but in undeniable black and white. Emily Carter would finally have justice, and her daughter would have the legacy she deserved, not just of wealth and position, but of love and courage. The transformation of the Anderson family began not with grand gestures, but with small, meaningful changes. The first was moving Grace from Memorial General to a private suite at St. Mary's, right next to Sarah's room. The two hospital beds were pushed close together, allowing grandmother and granddaughter to hold hands during their recovery, bridging the gap between their two worlds. Victoria took charge of renovating the Anderson mansion, starting with Emily's old library. The dark, heavy curtains were replaced with light, flowing ones that let in sunlight. Emily's favorite reading chair, preserved by Martha all these years, was restored to its place by the window. Most significantly, a portrait of Emily, painted from one of the discovered photographs, was hung above the fireplace, a silent guardian watching over the family's healing. William threw himself into restructuring the Anderson Corporation, dismantling Richard's network of corruption piece by piece. Each board meeting began with a new policy of transparency and ethical business practices. The company's first new initiative under his leadership was the establishment of the Emily Carter Memorial Foundation, providing medical care for underprivileged mothers and children. Sarah's recovery progressed steadily, strengthened by the constant presence of both her father and Grace. The hospital staff grew accustomed to the sight of William Anderson, powerful CEO, falling asleep in an uncomfortable chair between their beds, one hand holding his daughter's, the other resting protectively near Grace's. "Your mother would be so proud," Grace told Sarah one evening, both of them finally strong enough to sit up and share a meal. "Not just because you found your father, but because of how you did it with determination and dignity, just like she had." The pocket watch, now cleaned and restored, remained Sarah's constant companion, but its meaning had changed. No longer a mystery to be solved, it became a symbol of connection to her father, to her mother's memory, and to the future they would build together. Victoria, to everyone's surprise, formed a special bond with Grace. The elegant socialite and the humble seamstress found common ground in their love for Sarah and their desire to heal the family's wounds. They could often be found in deep conversation, sharing stories about Sarah's childhood from their different perspectives. The mansion's staff witnessed the change in atmosphere with joy and relief. Under Richard's reign, the house had been cold and formal. Now laughter echoed through the corridors. Martha resumed her position as housekeeper, this time with full honors and recognition for her years of loyal service to Emily's memory. William spent hours in Emily's library, sometimes reading, sometimes just sitting in her chair, holding Sarah's hand as they shared stories. He told her about meeting Emily, about their secret courtship, about all the dreams they had for their baby. Sarah, in turn, shared memories of growing up with Grace, of the love that had sustained her through years of poverty. The Anderson family lawyers worked tirelessly to ensure Sarah's legal status as William's heir was ironclad, but more importantly, they worked to bring justice to those who had helped Richard harm Emily. The doctor who had betrayed his oath faced criminal charges, along with several officials who had aided in the cover-up. One particularly moving moment came when Sarah discovered her mother's old poetry journal, preserved by Martha. Emily's words, written while carrying Sarah, spoke of hope, love, and dreams for her child's future. William found Sarah in the library one evening, reading these poems aloud, her voice carrying the same musical quality her mother's had. The mansion's gardens, once rigidly maintained, were replanted with Emily's favorite flowers, wild roses and forget-me-nots growing freely among the formal arrangements. Sarah and Grace spent their afternoons there during their recovery, Grace teaching Sarah the names of plants while William watched them with a smile that held both joy and regret for the years lost. As autumn turned to winter, the Anderson mansion prepared for its first Christmas as a truly united family. The traditional formal decorations were supplemented with handmade ornaments from Sarah and Grace's collection. Emily's memory was honored with white roses on the mantel, and her portrait wore a small sprig of holly. The transformation wasn't just physical or financial, it was emotional, spiritual, reaching into the very heart of what it meant to be an Anderson. The legacy Richard had tried so hard to protect was indeed changing, but into something far more valuable than mere wealth or social position. The day Grace was finally strong enough to leave the hospital marked a new beginning for everyone. The Anderson mansion's east wing had been completely renovated to create an apartment for her, combining luxury with the homey touches she loved. Her beloved sewing machine sat in pride of place by a bay window overlooking the gardens, while her worn recipe books found a home in a custom-built kitchen where she could still make her famous cinnamon rolls. "It's too much," Grace protested when she first saw the space, but William would hear none of it. "You raised my daughter when I couldn't," he said simply. "You gave her love when we failed her. This isn't charity, Grace, it's family." The transition wasn't without its challenges. Grace, used to managing every penny, struggled initially with the abundance around her. She would still clip coupons from newspapers, carefully saving them until Sarah or Victoria gently reminded her that such measures were no longer necessary. Old habits, born from years of careful poverty, died hard. But it was in the kitchen where Grace truly began to bridge the two worlds. The mansion's professional chef found himself learning from her, amazed by her ability to transform simple ingredients into dishes that carried the warmth of love in every bite. Soon the formal dining room was filled with the scent of her home cooking, drawing the family together for meals in a way Richard's stilted formal dinners never had. Sarah watched her grandmother bloom in her new environment. Grace's health improved dramatically with proper care and reduced stress. The lines of worry that had aged her prematurely began to soften, and her laugh, once rare and careful, became a frequent sound in the mansion's halls. Most touching was the relationship that developed between Grace and William. They would spend evenings in the library, sharing stories about Sarah's childhood from their different perspectives, Grace speaking of small triumphs and daily joys, William absorbing every detail of the years he'd missed. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, both understanding the unique pain of loving and losing Emily. Victoria, too, found unexpected comfort in Grace's presence. The older woman's practical wisdom and unconditional acceptance helped ease Victoria's guilt over her years of complicity in Richard's schemes. Grace had a way of listening without judgment, of offering advice wrapped in simple truths that cut through society's complications. "Family isn't about blood or names," Grace would say, her hands busy with some piece of sewing. "It's about who stays by your side when the world turns cold." Her words, born from experience, became a kind of motto for their newly formed family unit. The mansion's staff, many of whom remembered Emily with fondness, embraced Grace's unpretentious warmth. Martha especially found in her a kindred spirit, another woman who had protected Emily's legacy in her own way. The two could often be found sharing tea and memories in Grace's apartment, their conversation punctuated by the gentle whir of the sewing machine. Grace insisted on maintaining some of her old routines, particularly her early morning baking. The mansion's industrial kitchen would fill with the smell of fresh bread and pastries, drawing sleepy family members down in their robes to gather around the informal breakfast table. These casual moments, free from the weight of the Anderson name, became precious daily rituals. William ensured that Grace had the best medical care available, but it was her emotional healing that proved most remarkable. The worry that had been her constant companion for 15 years, the fear of being unable to provide for Sarah, of failing the child entrusted to her care, finally began to ease. One morning, Sarah found her grandmother in the garden, carefully tending to a patch of herbs, just like the ones they'd grown in their tiny apartment window box. "Are you happy here, Grandma?" she asked, noticing how the morning sun caught the silver in Grace's hair, making it shine like a crown. Grace straightened up, looking at the mansion that had become her home, at the garden where Sarah now played freely, at the family that had expanded to embrace them both. "Happy?" she repeated thoughtfully. "I'm more than happy, my dear. I'm at peace. Your mother would be too, seeing us all together like this." The physical transformation of the Anderson mansion mirrored the emotional metamorphosis of its inhabitants. What had once been a showcase of wealth and power gradually became a true home, filled with warmth and life. The process began in Emily's library and rippled outward, touching every corner of the vast house. The formal sitting room, once reserved for business meetings and social posturing, was reimagined as a family space. The stiff-backed Victorian furniture was replaced with comfortable couches and oversized chairs that invited people to linger. Sarah's piano, a gift from William, sat in the corner where Emily's portrait could watch over her daughter's practice sessions. The kitchen underwent perhaps the most dramatic change. The industrial steel and stark efficiency gave way to a warm, inviting space where Grace's influence reigned supreme. Copper pots hung from ceiling racks, herbs grew in window boxes, and the central island became a gathering spot where family members would perch on stools, sharing stories while Grace baked. William had the grand staircase restored to its original wood, stripping away decades of dark varnish to reveal honey-colored oak beneath. Family photographs now lined the walls, not just formal portraits, but candid moments, Sarah and Grace baking together, William teaching Sarah to play chess, Victoria tending to the garden. Among them, carefully preserved and prominently displayed, were the recovered photos of Emily. The gardens flourished under the combined care of Victoria and Grace. The rigid geometric patterns Richard had favored were softened with wildflowers and herbs. Emily's favorite roses were given pride of place, their unruly beauty a testament to love over formality. A small vegetable patch appeared, reminding Sarah and Grace of their window box garden from their apartment days. Even the staff quarters were transformed. Martha oversaw the renovations personally, ensuring comfortable living spaces for those who made the mansion run. The strict hierarchy Richard had enforced gave way to a more collaborative atmosphere, where maids and cooks felt free to share meals and conversation with the family. The mansion's formal dining room, once a place of tense silence and rigid protocol, became the heart of daily family life. The massive table that had intimidated business associates now hosted lively family dinners, homework sessions, and late-night hot chocolate gatherings. Grace's recipes mingled with the chef's gourmet creations, creating menus that celebrated both worlds. Sarah's suite of rooms reflected her unique position bridging two worlds. The luxury of her new life was tempered with treasured items from her old one. The patched quilt Grace had made her, the small bookshelf from their apartment, the window box she'd tended so carefully. Her balcony offered a view of both the manicured gardens and the city beyond, a perfect metaphor for her journey. The music room, long sealed shut, was reopened and restored. Emily's old piano, preserved under dust cloths, was tuned and brought back to life under Sarah's fingers. The room filled with music again, not just classical pieces, but the folk songs Emily had loved, the lullabies Grace had sung, and Sarah's own compositions. What had once been Richard's imposing study was transformed into a family room. The dark paneling was lightened, the heavy curtains replaced with sheer fabrics that let in natural light. The massive desk where he had plotted against Emily was removed, replaced with comfortable seating arranged for conversation and connection. Even the mansion's facade seemed to soften. Climbing roses were encouraged to ramble up the stern stone walls, and window boxes burst with colorful blooms. The intimidating iron gates were refinished in a warmer tone, and the guardhouse was converted into a welcoming gatehouse where Frank, now head of security, greeted visitors with a smile. Most significantly, the servants' entrance where Emily had once slipped in and out was restored and dignified. A plaque was installed commemorating her life and the love story that had begun there. The door itself was painted a bright, welcoming blue, Emily's favorite color. The cellar where Richard had kept his precious wine collection was converted into a cozy movie theater where the family gathered for regular film nights, complete with Grace's homemade popcorn and warm blankets for cuddling. The space that had once stored bottles worth fortunes now stored something far more valuable: family memories. 1 year after Sarah's dramatic collapse at St. Mary's Hospital, the Anderson mansion hosted a very special celebration. It was Emily's birthday, and for the first time the family had chosen to commemorate rather than hide it. The gardens were in full bloom, Emily's favorite roses creating a natural cathedral of color and fragrance. Sarah, now 16 and fully recovered, stood at the piano in the library, playing the pieces her mother had loved. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence, the pocket watch still hanging faithfully around her neck. But now it was joined by another chain, the matching piece William had finally retrieved from his European exile, completing the set Emily had meant for them to share. Grace, radiant in a dress she and Victoria had designed together, moved through the gathering with easy grace. Her health had been fully restored by the treatments at St. Mary's, and the past year of peace had erased years from her face. She still insisted on baking for family gatherings, her cinnamon rolls now famous among Boston's elite for their humble perfection. William watched his daughter perform, his eyes bright with pride and lingering amazement at having her in his life. The past year had transformed him from a haunted exile into a present, engaged father. He had learned to balance running the Anderson empire with family time, never missing Sarah's piano recitals or their nightly chess games. Victoria had found her own place in their unconventional family. No longer Richard's unwilling accomplice, she had become a true partner to William in business and a loving stepmother to Sarah. Her signature appeared alongside his on the papers establishing the Emily Carter Arts Foundation, which provided musical education to underprivileged children. Martha, now officially retired but still very much part of the family, sat in her favorite corner of the library, surrounded by photographs she had carefully preserved through the years. Each image told part of their story: Emily's radiant smile, Sarah's journey from a desperate girl to a confident young woman, the family's healing and growth. The celebration was intimate but joyful. Frank, promoted to head of security, stood guard with a proud smile. The hospital staff who had helped save both Sarah and Grace were honored guests. But even some of Richard's old business associates, those who had chosen to support William's reforms, were present to witness the Anderson family's rebirth. During a quiet moment, Sarah stepped into the garden where her parents had first fallen in love. The setting sun painted the roses gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of Emily's favorite flowers. She touched the pocket watch, feeling its steady tick against her palm. Sometimes, William said, joining her by the rose arbor, when you smile a certain way or laugh at something, Grace says, "I see your mother so clearly." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "She would be so proud of you, Sarah. Not just for finding me, but for showing us all how to be a real family." Inside, Grace and Victoria were arranging Emily's favorite desserts on the library table, their easy conversation a far cry from the tension of a year ago. Through the window, Sarah could see Martha showing old photographs to the guests, sharing stories of Emily's kindness and courage. The pocket watch chimed softly, marking the hour. Sarah opened it, revealing the inscription that had once been a mystery, but now was a cherished truth to my beloved son. May time bring you back to us. Below it, William had added a new line to my beloved daughter, who brought time full circle. As twilight settled over the Anderson mansion, the family gathered in the library. The portrait of Emily seemed to smile down at them as Sarah played one final piece, a composition of her own that wove together themes of loss and discovery, pain and healing, separation and reunion. Grace wiped away happy tears as William pulled her into a warm embrace, thanking her once again for saving and raising his daughter. Victoria arranged fresh roses beneath Emily's portrait, while Martha shared knowing smiles with Frank by the door. The Anderson mansion, once a fortress of secrets and pain, had become a sanctuary of love and healing. Emily's spirit lived on not just in photographs and memories, but in the love that had transformed a broken family into something whole and beautiful. As the last notes of Sarah's music faded into the gathering darkness, the steady ticking of the pocket watch kept time with the beating hearts of a family made stronger by trials, united by love, and finally completely whole. Dear viewers, if this story has touched your heart and moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Your reflections and experiences make our storytelling community richer and more meaningful. Please consider subscribing to our channel to support our team's dedication to bringing you powerful, emotional stories that remind us of the enduring strength of love and family. Your subscription helps us continue creating content that touches hearts and changes lives. If you found value in this story, we'd be grateful if you could share it with friends and family who might also be moved by its message. Every like, share, and comment encourages us to keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for being part of our storytelling journey.